These lights are so obnoxiously bright. I don't get enough YouTube video views to really care about lighting and all sorts of stuff like that because why not? I recently noticed a trend uh, on the YouTube videos that are being recommended to me. Uh, it started off with me watching one video of a guy who, if I can find the video, I'll link it. But he basically talked about how he got laid off of his job after working there for 9 years. He was a construction worker. He was saying how shocking it was because a few days beforehand he was told how good of a job he was doing and how people like him were needed because he was one of the few people that never called out. Long story short, he got laid off and he started reevaluating his life. And he said he was never going to rely on an employer for a single solitary income again because made him too desperate and it made him realize how much he said no to his family and yes to a job that he got fired from over text. Ever since watching that video, I've been getting video after video recommendation on YouTube of people saying I would rather die than work a 9 to 5. Some of these videos are dramatic, I would want to say, even as somebody who has quite a lot of jobs and somebody who himself is a little bit dramatic. I find some of these things to be a little bit corny, but all of them touch on the same issue, which is that something has happened to work that has made it completely untenable, and there's a very sharp disconnect between our employers and our employees. I had another realization of this when I was trying to figure out about another book that I was going to write, and part of me was considering writing a book about cults. I have a very weird fascination with cults. I like learning about cults. I like learning about multi-level marketing schemes because a lot of them are very cult-like. And there was just a couple of things that I noticed when I was listening to just some of these people have speeches. Every job that I've had has tried to make the work itself seem more important, seem more valuable than it actually is. And there's always some sort of policy and mentality that's presented that never really seems to actually be reflected on what the employer actually does. It's presented as one way when you're applying for the job, and it always ends up being something else. This is something that everybody kind of knows to some extent too. I don't really care what your politics are. We all know that when you join a job, they all try to tell you how it's a family. They all try to tell you how we're really connected here and how we work together as a team. And lo and behold, you work for a couple of weeks and you start to realize that that family and that teamwork starts going out the window because at the end of the day, everything's really about money. And we know everything's about money because our bills and our utilities and everything that we're buying in the stores are getting more expensive. And the excuse that we're given is, well, that's just the market. However, our wages are very slow to grow to match the cost of these increased cost of living to the point to where the standard of living has actually been decreasing because now it's considered a little bit of a luxury in some places to be able to afford your electric bill. I'm very fortunate for now to not live near a data center, but there are people who are experiencing electric bills in the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars range, which is making business and personal life more expensive, which is only going to further increase the cost of goods and services. And it's only going to further slow down the economy because we have this overvaluing of data and AI that seems to not really be improving our economy, but is increasing the GDP because there's a lot of speculation in the AI market, which is why everybody says there's going to be a bubble. And looking at cult tactics and comparing it to a lot of employee and sales tactics, I don't want to say that the Venn diagram is just a circle, but there's definitely going to be a little bit of overlap. I experienced this when I worked in the law enforcement and in my current job, how Your job is supposed to be some greater and higher calling beyond just making money. And you are supposed to be doing your part at this job to basically prove your value or to contribute to something greater than yourself and to the team. This teamwork mentality is always reinforced over and over again without actually being practiced. On top of that, we're seeing a very noticeable increase in ordinary jobs that don't need to have daily meetings, having daily meetings. The Microsoft Teams has become the end all be all for for managers technically being able to evaluate employees and employee needs and to disperse their policies and new rules. And learning about this and learning about how HR tends to work, you find that a lot of these meetings are ways for your employer to essentially technically offer for you to evaluate and to be open about any concerns that you are having in the workplace. In saying all of this, the workplace also doesn't want you to be negative, which means that you are highly discouraged from ever actually having a problem in the workplace. See, the value in the worker is to be a worker that never has a problem, but also you are given the opportunity to address problems. And this has essentially made it to where at a few of my jobs, you're never really allowed to bring up issues with management because that can just mark you as a bad employee. It's to a point to where everybody that's worked for HR and every single lawyer that has to do with workers' rights will tell you not to talk to HR for similar reasons that they tell you not to talk to the police because you might accidentally implicate yourself or say something that might get you fired. All of this has made it to where personally as an employee, it's been very relieving to hear just a little bit of honesty from management. When your manager basically says, "Hey, this is just what I need from you, and then I'm not going to bother you for anything else," and the actual interactions can be a little bit more transparent, there's this weird sense of relief that washes over me from the fact that I've had so many experiences where what's actually being said isn't the actual message being conveyed every single time I talk to management or HR. Instead of over glorifying or undermining every single task that you're doing, you're merely being told what is needed from you, and you're being asked to do this, and you're being fairly compensated for it, and it's a fairly reasonable exchange. There's no weird pressure of being an employee for having to overcompensate to make people believe that you're working harder than you actually are, as well as there's no real need for the manager to really pretend like they care more than they actually do. And this is a very relieving feeling. I would even argue that this is a very rare feeling in a lot of today's society because we've allowed for much of the workplace to be a lot of bullshit. You have a take-home phone. You have to drive. You have to be willing to drive further for work. You have to be willing to offer more of your personal time for work, and a lot of jobs don't pay you enough to actually be able to pay the bills. So you have to be infinitely available for a job, and in many cases, you don't have time for a second job. In some cases, like in law enforcement, you have to get permission to get a second job because you have to be willing to be on call, and you have to be willing to make that job your first priority. It's very jarring to be somebody who has learned about the nature of cults a little bit and who has spoken to some people who have been a part of cults and who has spoken to many people, myself included, who have experienced some sort of religious discrimination to see similar tactics being used in sales and the workplace. The constant use of things like guilt and morality to try to get you to go above and beyond for a job that should be relatively transparent. In many jobs right nowadays, you're having shifting standards to where you're not really certain what's going to be expected of you the next day, and you're always going to be wondering if you're doing enough because that's a benefit to your employer. And if you're ever not liking your job, society tells you to get a better job. And in spite of the fact that most jobs don't really pay enough for you to be able to afford bills and live on your own and put money in savings, especially to be able to pay for college, you then have people who go on national television and say, well, just work harder. Or you have people say, get a real job. If most jobs excluding the billionaires and the millionaires and the CEOs who skew the average amount of money that people make, if most jobs don't really pay enough for you to thrive, and you have a lot of influence culture and that's giving financial advice rather than actually educated financial advisors, and you have people like this one channel, the video that I saw the other day, I can't remember his name, who said there's no excuse for anybody to not be wealthy, as if we could somehow make every single person ever a rich person, because that's not really how money works. We have this delusional way of thinking when it comes to wealth and when it comes to work and when it comes to labor. The employee is never allowed to admit that they just want to have more time off, and the employee is never allowed, but they are allowed to admit that they want more money. They're not allowed to demand more money, nor are they allowed to unionize. Even though it is technically illegal, there are ways for your employers to. And the employer can both use guilt and emotional manipulation to make you think they care about you while actively demanding more from you and being allowed to be as unreasonable as humanly possible. You don't technically have to answer your emails when you're off work, but you are responsible for your emails. So you have to answer your email. You don't have to answer your messages, but you have a take home phone and you were supposed to have access for you 24/7. But we don't have to pay for you to be able to answer that phone, nor do we have to pay to have you drive further than you normally would for work. We make your position a salary position so we don't actually have to quantify how many hours you have. And oh, look at that, we have things for you to show up to work for that don't actually function and get work done, but they do reinforce this weird workplace culture where we want you to essentially try to have fun at work or try to have some sort of camaraderie at work as long as there's management supervision. We have workplaces that try to tell you that they are your family while actively asking you to spend more time away from your family and having you see little to no financial benefit from it. It blows my mind that people say that we need to address the fatherlessness crisis, yet the same people that care about the fatherlessness crisis seem to want dads to just work all the time. We want your dad in your life, but we don't want them actually home teaching you things or how to grow up and be a man. We just want them to be bodies to show up to work so that they can pay the bills so that your mom can stay at home. But we don't want to actually make sure that we're always paying them enough to make sure that they have a stay-at-home mom. So the weird nuclear family ideal that we keep pushing for people to have is actually an unrealistic standard that we can say is a moral failing on your end from being able to do. You see, we never say that employers don't want to pay their employees, but we're always willing to say that people don't want to work. It's weird that we have to not be honest about these things because we know that the vast majority of people, if they were to win the lottery tomorrow, would either quit their jobs or they would stop working so hard and immediately start taking more vacations and time for themselves and actually trying to enjoy a little bit more out of their lives. If you want to understand the mental health crisis in this country and the reason why we're having more shootings and more violence and more political unrest, look at people's paychecks and look at how the cost of living, and you will find your answer. If you care about government legitimacy, but you don't really want to criticize the current administration because it happens to be the same political ideology that you have, you're missing the point. And if you want to argue with me because I'm a liberal, you're serving the interests of the rich people. People who are interested in paying you the least amount possible and making you believe that your work is not valued merely because your employer doesn't want to pay you enough. And they use small businesses as an example of why you should be paid less because they don't make as much money and compare it to billion-dollar corporations that are international. It's beyond my point how people can't see this very transparent lie. It's also weird to me that we have a lot of libertarians who are willing to acknowledge the structural and economic impact that a government has and why the government should be limited, but they can't apply that same logic to a business. This is an example I use all the time when I'm trying to talk to libertarians and conservatives. Some of you guys are a little bit too young to remember this, but I remember when I was in high school when I was overweight and I wanted to lose weight, and I was trying to make sure that I was paying attention to my sugar intake. Back in my day, Your nutrition labels didn't have the little tag that said added sugars. Everything just said it was healthy, organic, or natural, even though the sugar was a natural flavoring. And food companies didn't have to tell you that they were necessarily adding sugars. They just had to say that sucrose, or one of the many terminologies that is used for sugar, is one of the ingredients, and you had to be able to basically know the chemistry name for multiple different strands of sugar to be able to recognize that sugar was being added to your food. The sugar lobby fought against added sugars being added to your nutritional labels, and up till the point that where they lost, and our government actually did something that people wanted, which is force food companies to say that they add sugar to products. Everything changed in our grocery stores. If you're wondering why, you can walk through the grocery stores and you see protein, high fiber, no sugar added on virtually everything on the shelves. It's because of this one bill, because people had to be forced to be conscientious of what's being placed in their food. We don't have that same process when it comes to our work. And so again, it's hard for people to imagine just how much people get fucked in the workplace. Physically knowing how much you bring to the company, and the cost of operations, and how much your management and CEOs get paid, these you are essentially operating without these other two pieces of information, and you're often argued against from having these other two pieces of information, and are being told that you're selfish for wanting to know your own value at the workplace. Instead, you are told that you are overpaid and that you are too selfish while you are struggling to pay bills. And when I say you, I just mean the vast majority of people. There's a reason why when people go overseas and they get a part-time job, and the first thing that they're being asked is, when do you want to take vacation? This is how many personal hours you have. Americans are very often shocked by how many personal hours they have. Now, this is where a lot of Republicans will essentially tell me, well, if you don't like it here, then go to Europe. But this is my point exactly. I actually value workers, and I actually value how hard people who are physically doing work actually what they actually end up contributing to the company itself. I don't think another manager and another meeting and another layer of administrative interference with the workplace and another eyes on everything that I'm doing is necessarily adding value to what I'm doing to the workplace. But it is yet another siphon of the profit that I might be making for the company that is just there to basically be able to control the employees more and to be able to push me harder and harder. As an employee, when you have too much management, your work is subsidizing management, having more management have more of their eyes on you to be able to push you harder so that you can make more money so that management can push you harder. But because too much of this touches onto Marxist theory, we're not allowed to talk about it because you're labeled a communist for being able to acknowledge something that might actually be a little bit factual. And because we live in a very extremist society, you can't have a single solitary opinion without having to completely forego any and every ideal that might go against that ideology because, again, it benefits the owners of this country to have ideological thinking. Ask your boss what the average salary of your workplace is. Ask your boss how much your new employees are getting paid. Ask your boss if you can get the higher sign-on bonus because they incentivize hiring people and the very costly process of training new people without really valuing the employees that they've had for a long time.